Two recent studies published within a couple days of each other claim that eating more meat increases your risk of dying prematurely and increases your risk of a whole host of other diseases like pneumonia and diverticulitis and heart disease. Should you be worried? I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at DietDoctor.com, and the quick answer to that question, should you be worried, is a resounding no. We see these studies time and time again, and they can be so confusing for individuals when they read them to say, oh my goodness, does this impact me? Does the findings in this study have a meaningful impact on me and the way I should be living my life? And the answer is absolutely not. So let's get into the studies a little bit. First one was published in the Journal of American Heart Association, and it was a retrospective look, so went back and looked at the data for the Women's Health Initiative, and they had over 100,000 postmenopausal women in the cohort, and they just crunched the data, right? That's all they do. They're not studying anybody new. They're not designing a new study. They're simply taking the data, probably through some computer program, and crunching it and trying to find out any associations that exist. So those who ate the most amount of plant protein had a minimal reduction in death risk, so the hazard ratio of 0.91, so a very small decreased risk of death. And those who had the highest amount of animal protein, such as meat, had a very small increased risk of dying by the hazard ratio of 1.06. So I always like to put this into perspective. Hazard ratio means how much more likely is an event to happen. So when you look at the hazard ratio for smoking and cancer, the hazard ratios are somewhere between 15 and 30. Not 1.30, but 30. And here we're talking about 1.06. It doesn't get any smaller. So even if we can absolutely trust everything in this study, the result is minimal and it means absolutely nothing for you as an individual. But we can't trust everything else in the study because the data comes from food frequency questionnaires, which is notoriously unreliable. It's more of a marker about what people think they should be eating if they're health-minded. And it is just shrouded with healthy user bias. And all you have to do is look at the baseline characteristics. So the baseline characteristics in this study showed that those who ate more animal protein had a lower education level. They were more likely to smoke. They're more likely to have diabetes, less likely to exercise, and more likely to have a high body mass index. Now, I can guarantee you that eating animal protein, eating meat did not cause them to smoke, did not cause them to have a lower educational level, did not cause them to not exercise. But yet, that would be the same conclusion as saying eating more meat caused them to die at a younger age. Because these are just associations, and it's the healthy user bias. The people who were eating less meat during the Women's Health Initiative trial were the ones who were more likely to be listening to their doctors, more likely to be being proactive about their health because that's what the message was at the time. So it doesn't make sense. Now, you could say, well, this was a randomized trial, right? It was back when it was originally started, but now looking at the data, it's sort of how people just started living their lives. And it's really the randomization is done and gone. And they're not really following the randomized diet anymore. So it really doesn't tell us anything about the risk of red meat. Now, the second study, published in BMC Medicine, it has the exact same criticism. They retrospectively reviewed 474,000 adults over 8 years. And what they found was the people who ate more red meat and processed meat had a minimal increased risk of heart disease, pneumonia, diverticular disease, colon polyps, and diabetes. Again, with a hazard ratio of 1.19 to 1.3, so minuscule hazard ratio. And baseline characteristics, those who ate more meat were less educated, had a higher body mass index, more likely to smoke, more likely to drink, less likely to exercise. Okay, I feel like a little bit of a broken record here, but you know what? It reminds me of that movie scene from Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which was, I thought, a great movie. But there's this scene where the Vince Vaughn character, he's in bed, and he gets his notification for a new bounty. And he sort of rolls over and says, I don't get out of bed for less than $500,000, and goes back to sleep because it's not enough. It's not worth his attention. It's exactly how I feel about this study. All right, it's a little bit of a strange analogy, I get it, but for some reason that sticks in my brain. These studies aren't worth getting out of bed for. These studies aren't worth our attention or the media attention because they don't add anything meaningful to our discussion for me as a clinician discussing with the patient in front of me, or you as an individual trying to decide what this means for you. It does not add anything meaningful. So it brings up the question, why do we see these studies come over and over and over again? And that's a fault of our academic system. I mean, that's a fault of our scientific system, because look, if you're a PhD student and you need to create a publication, you only have a few years to do it, and with all the writing and the editing and the back and forth, maybe even just 2 years to do it. So what's the easiest way to do that? You just crunch data and try and come up with a conclusion. So the system fosters it. Or even if you're a professor and part of your promotions or part of your tenure involves more publications, then these are easy just to crank out. I mean, let's face it, you're not designing a trial, you're not randomizing people. It doesn't take long to do in terms of the scope of research. So it's unfortunate. They're easy to do, and that makes them pretty much ubiquitous, that people are just cranking them out. But we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean for us? So it's a bit of a rant once again, because as long as we keep seeing these studies getting headlines, I'm going to keep ranting about them and making sure you understand the difference between quality science that actually means something to you and poor quality science that really should not be worth getting out of bed for. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Hope that was helpful. Join us again here on the Diet Doctor News on YouTube for more updates.